Has the faltering U.S. economy turned the corner, or is a recession still looming? Well, after 6 months of contraction, the nation's gross domestic product, the gauge of goods and services, rose at an annual rate of 2.6% in the third quarter. With only days to go before the midterm election, this is how President Biden responded.
Great economic report today, the GDP report. Things are looking good.
And Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says she doesn't see signs of a recession.
We have unemployment at a 50-year low. There are 2 job vacancies for every American who's looking for work.
Here to weigh in is Young Voices commentator, Associate Professor of Economics at Texas Tech University, Alexander Salter. Alexander, it's good having you with us again. So what do you make of this, the latest GDP numbers, and then President Biden and Secretary Yellen in their comments?
I have to admit that I was surprised by the latest figure. Everybody was expecting it to be slightly negative, and then it turned out to be significantly higher than we were all anticipating in terms of actual economic expansion. Now, we shouldn't be surprised that the Biden administration is trying to make political hay out of this. They're obviously in a pretty deep hole, and they need all the good news that we can get. And while the numbers are encouraging, I wouldn't be so quick to assume that everything is fine with the U.S. economy. I think that we still have reason to adopt a wait-and-see approach to see whether we're actually going to have the wind at our backs for the next couple of quarters.
Yeah, it's a little tough when the Fed keeps increasing interest rates. The average rate for someone with excellent credit seeking a mortgage right now, a 30-year mortgage, is about 7.2%. So what do you expect is going to happen to the housing market?
Interest rates are going up, although I would say that once you factor in inflation, not exorbitantly so. I think that the Federal Reserve, if anything, has moved too slow in terms of contracting monetary policy. But there's no doubt that at least right now, we're observing mortgage rates that we haven't seen in a very long time. All else being equal, you would expect higher rates to put a damper on the mortgage market. But then again, you also have to pay attention to what's happening with supply and demand at the same time. I think that most commentators are anticipating that perhaps new builds and new sales are going to cool off. And I think that that's where the smart money is. But again, these things can change very quickly.
Alexander, the president proposed a down payment toward Equity Act. He says that would give first-time buyers a $25,000 grant to help with mortgage down payment or closing costs. And are we about to repeat history here with another housing crash where mortgages were given to people who really couldn't afford them? Your thoughts about that?
Well, speaking of supply and demand, if that program were implemented, the demand for mortgages would certainly rise. You would expect that to lead to a higher price of mortgage. But then again, since the instrument is going up in price, you would actually expect the mortgage rate to rise as well. And so because of that, you would actually see a larger mortgage rate, but at the same time, you would also see more mortgages. So interestingly, price and quantity would move in the same direction in that case. But I also would be worried about the ultimate unsustainability of these sorts of packages. The question is, would that sort of a plan push people into taking on debt that is ultimately fundamentally unsustainable? I think that that's an open question. And in all other sectors, the U.S. economy does appear to be, quite frankly, addicted to debt. And I don't think that we have any strong reason to suppose that a federal program like that would get us off that debt addiction.
Yes, we saw that happen before, didn't we? And of course, inflation is on voters' minds as Americans vote in the midterm election. So do you see inflation cooling anytime soon? How do you expect that will affect the election results?
What I'm worried about is the broadening of core inflation. Previously, you could still stick your head in the sand and say that this is really just due to volatile food and energy prices. But what we've seen with the last couple of price index releases is that inflation is really broad-based. It's affecting all the major sectors of the economy. This is not a just 1 or 2 industry phenomenon. Price pressures are everywhere, and I don't think that we're going to return to the historical target of 2% inflation anytime soon. In terms of the politics of it, voters have clearly listed the economy and inflation as their #1 issue. So obviously that's going to go quite badly for the incumbent party, for the party currently in power. Expect Republicans to surge and capitalize on it.
Yeah, pocketbook, pocketbook, pocketbook. People vote pocketbook issues. And I'm going to put you on the spot here, Alexander. What's your prediction for the end of this year and, say, the first quarter of 2023? Are we heading toward a recession? Will a strong Christmas buying season delay it? Or do you believe, as the president and Yellen suggests, that things are looking good for the U.S. economy?
I don't think that things are looking good for the US economy, but neither do I anticipate that we're going to see any major contraction. I think that based on what we've observed, based on recent trends, in particular, the piling up of increasing federal rules that make production and distribution harder, the increasing fiscal burden, increasing inflation, all of these things make the economy less efficient and less productive. So I would actually expect a little bit of sclerosis to continue. I would expect something close to zero growth on approximation. Perhaps you might get a slight expansion as some of the sectors continue to bounce back a little bit. So while we're not in nightmare territory, there's really no reason to put up with continuing economic sclerosis. The American economy is at root dynamic. We can and must do better. And ultimately, doing better is going to be a matter of getting counterproductive regulations and rules out of the way and unleashing the dynamism of the American economy.
Okay, we'll see what happens in a few days. Young Voices commentator, Associate Professor of Economics at Texas Tech University, Alexander Salter. Thank you for sharing your insights.